Hello and welcome to Aero Innovations. I'm Aero, your AI host. If you're new to the channel, we're running cash drawings all throughout the month of September. Free $100 if you get picked, with the grand prize being your choice of either $500 or the position of being my acolyte, which is a coaching position worth over $1,500. So stay until the end of the video for details. For this episode, we're going to dot our I's and cross our T's. I started vlogging on June 9th this year, during the middle of an absolute tear of a winning streak. Let's wrap up my sessions for the end of June, where I won my 20th and 21st consecutive winning sessions. This first session takes place on June 23rd at 12:50 in the morning. We're playing 2-5 no limit hold'em at the Win Encore in Las Vegas, where I bind for $1,500, which is 300 big blinds. I win a couple of small, unimportant hands leading to this hand an hour into the session. Here, I open under the gun to 15 with pocket 8s. Only the low jack calls. The flop comes 7, 3, 10 with 2 diamonds. This is a pretty good flop, all things considered. There's only one overcard to our pair. Poker is all about information, and currently I don't have any. If I were to bet here, I still wouldn't have any. Our opponent could have any number of gut shots like 5-6 suited, or an open ender with a hand like 8-9 suited, the flush draw, top pair, or even middle pair. So instead, I start with a check. My opponent checks the action back. Okay, so we're pretty sure he doesn't have a 10. The turn brings a 9 of diamonds, completing the front door flush. My opponent checks his cards. This is almost always a diamond check. Not double diamonds, but single diamond. A person almost always knows when they make a flush. The 9 gives my hand an open-ended straight draw in case I'm currently beat, so I lead with a bet of 20. My opponent calls. We go to a river, which is a jack of clubs. Oh, goody, we make a straight. It's unlikely my opponent also has a straight since I'm holding 2 of the 8s. On this type of board, with a 1-card straight apparent and also a flush possible, how much value can I possibly go for in this river? I assume my opponent is only beating ace high, so I shoot out another small bet of 25. My opponent suddenly raises me to 75. Easy call here. I'm only realistically losing to a flush or a bigger straight with a hand like king-queen. Thankfully, my opponent doesn't have any of those. He value owned himself and shows jack 9 of hearts for runner-runner top 2 pairs. I didn't even have to do anything. He took himself to Value Town. For this next hand, the straddle is on. +1 and low jack limp. It folds to me in the small blind. I raise to 50 with ace king of spades. The +1 folds, but the low jack calls with a starting stack of barely over 300. The flop comes 4, 6, 2, rainbow. We don't have anything whatsoever except 2 overs and a couple of backdoor draws. However, this flop is so low it's likely to miss our opponent as well. So I lead with a small down bet of 35 to deny equity from random overcards like 10 jack suited or jack queen suited. My opponent suddenly shoves with his short stack. He's most likely holding a small overpair like 7s, 8s, or even 9s, for which I only have a 29% chance of beating, so we're not getting the right pot odds, so I have no choice but to fold. We start this next hand at the 2-hour mark. We're floating roughly even on the session. 3 people have limped before the action gets to me in the cutoff. I'm looking down at this dog urine that is 5-7 offsuit, but it doesn't smell so bad in late position with 3 limpers in front of us, so let's play bingo and hope to get picked. I make the call. The small blind folds, so we go 5-handed in position to a flop of 4, 6, king, rainbow. This is an absolutely ideal flop for our hand. We're open-ended on a rainbow board with completely clean outs. If we hit either end of our straight, we make the absolute nuts. Big blind and under the gun check. Middle position leads for 15 into the $25 pot. I make the no-brainer call. The action folds back around to the under the gun position, who puts in the check raise to 75. Suddenly, the middle position re-raises to 140. Okay, this puts us in a bad pickle. Middle position undoubtedly has a set here. Under the gun just put in a horrible check raise here with what is most likely a 1-pair holding like king-queen or even limped aces gone wrong. His check raise is going to make our draw a lot more expensive, so this hand is going to go from 0 to over 9,000 really quick.
It's over 9,000!
Both of our opponents are really deep, however, with the middle position having our $1,500 stack covered. We have the perfect hand to crack any monster, so I make the call. Under the gun calls as well, giving us even better odds. Unfortunately, the turn is a 10 of clubs, missing us completely. Under the gun checks. Middle position leads for 340 into the pot of 445. Our outs are still clean, unless under the gun randomly has a hand like king-queen or ace-king of clubs. I'm less concerned about him though. He's most likely drawing pretty dead to the middle position better. In this instance, we can be almost certain that neither opponent is holding any of our needed cards. So counting the 4 shared cards on the table, the 2 cards we're holding, and the 4 cards our opponents are holding, there are 8 remaining cards that will make our hand. We divide 8 by the 42 unknown cards to get 19%, or roughly 1 in 5. We need to win a pot of just under $1,800 to make this call profitable in the long run. Counting our call money, we would only need to win an additional $635 on the river to break even mathematically. Assuming we run this exact scenario 10 times over in the long run, we would need to win even less on the river if the under the gun calls. Those are the implied odds. Seeing as we have almost 1K behind after making this call, and the fact that I am almost certain middle position isn't going anywhere with what is most likely a set, I make the call. Under the gun folds. We go to a river, which unfortunately is a king of clubs. We break out completely. So when the middle position jams for his remaining stack, which covers me, I make the instant fold. We may not have won this hand, but this is a perfect example of how you're supposed to calculate implied odds when deciding whether or not to make a call while on a draw. You have to factor in what everyone else is most likely holding, your odds of winning versus the bet amount, and the implied odds of how much you'll win if you make your hand. Unlike the nearly 5K win we amassed when we rivered the flush in vlog number 2, we brick out here. But the important take is that if you run these types of situations 10 or 20 times through in the long run, we should come out ahead. Never make a call based on instinct. Always use mathematics, or more accurately, statistics, to determine whether you should make a call when on a draw. With this loss, we're down $589, so top back up to $1,500 and move on. For this next hand, my old table has broken and I've moved to a different full table. The hijack opens for 15. The cutoff calls. I 3-bet on the button to 60 with Jack Queen of clubs. Only the hijack calls and everyone else folds. We go heads up in position to flop of 10, Queen, 5, Rainbow. We flop top pair, but we have to be careful on these types of boards. We do not have a top pair type of hand. Don't bet this as if you have a monster. Keep in mind our hand is only good due to position. When our opponent checks, we start with a third pot down bet to 50. Our opponent calls. We go to a turn, which is the 5 of diamonds, pairing bottom pair. This is perfect if our opponent is holding something like 9-10 or 8-10 suited. It reduces his 2 pair outs. When our opponent checks, I put in another tentative bet of 100, which is a similar size I would use if I had an overpair, since this board isn't all that frightening. I don't want to bet too big here, or else we're only going to get owned with a hand that has a bigger kicker, like ace-queen. Thankfully, that's not going to be an issue here as our opponent folds, so we take down a nice pot without too much of a fight. This was an advanced maneuver. Don't mimic this play in any 100 big blind structure. I mix in this type of 3-bet to disguise the strength of my hands, so my opponents don't always think I 3-bet only with monsters. For this next hand, we're currently over 3 hours into the session. 3 people limp when the cutoff opens to 30. We're holding our least favorite premium hand on the button. I 3-bet to 110 with pocket kings, the Cowboys, the bane of my poker profitability. Everyone folds to the cutoff who puts in the call. The flop comes 4, 6, 10, Rainbow. Gorgeous flop, really. We're only realistically losing to pocket 10s on a flop like this given the pre-flop action. We're dominating hands like jacks or queens. When our opponent checks it over to us, we down bet to 75, offering a really cheap price for what we can only suspect is 2 to 3 outs, depending on whether our opponent is holding a pocket pair or a random ace high. He makes the call, which I suspect he would do with nearly 100% of his range. The turn is another 10 of spades, which we're not really happy to see. Our opponent checks again. Don't be afraid of this 10. Given the pre-flop action, our opponent will almost never have a 10 here. I'm not a big fan of it because it'll limit how much we can squeeze on future streets though. Jacks and queens are not going to pay off too much because they might irrationally fear this second 10. When our opponent checks it over to us for a second time, I put in an extremely milky quarter pot bet of 100. Our opponent calls again. The river is a jack of diamonds. A jack is actually one of the cards we have to be worried about. There's not a lot that our opponent could have here that we could try to get 3 streets of value out of. He might even have air, which would make it pointless for us to bet here. And if I get too greedy and throw out another bet, he could easily check raise us off our hand regardless of his actual holding. So this time, when our opponent checks, I choose to check the action back. He tables ace-queen offsuit for no pair no draw, likely with evil designs to check raise the river, which I didn't give him the opportunity to do so. Had he check raised the turn, I wasn't going anywhere. With this win, we make a small dent in the hole we've been sitting in since early in the session. For the last notable hand of the session, there's a live 10. I open to 40 in the hijack with ace-queen of hearts. It gets folded to the small blind, who 3-bets me to 140 with a starting stack of about $12.50. I definitely have a hand worth calling in position for another $100, so I make the call. The flop comes ace, 6, 7, Rainbow with 1 heart. Our opponent starts with a half pot bet of 150. This is a beautiful flop. We beat all big pocket pairs like queens or kings. We're only losing to ace king and pocket aces. I highly doubt pocket aces would lead so huge on a dry flop, so this is just an easy call. The turn brings in a 9 of spades, putting 2 spades on board. Our opponent checks. There's no way we can expect all 3 streets of value against a hand like kings or queens on an ace-high board, so we put in a deceptive check back. The river is absolutely gorgeous. It's another ace. I prefer this over a queen, even though a queen would allow us to beat a hand like ace-king. The ace is better, since it would allow us some delicious value out of any big pocket pair. Surely enough, our opponent tries to milk us with a bet of 250 into the pot of 590. He has about 700 behind. I could go for a small raise here. There's a good chance I could get a call out of a big pair if I just do a min raise. However, I think the second ace on this board is really good. It'll make our hand look more like a bluff. Plus, I don't think there's any way our opponent can fold a hand like ace-jack or ace-10 suited that tried to get out of line pre-flop. So I choose to go for a knockout haymaker with an all-in shove. Our opponent tanks for over a minute, which we like seeing. He eventually shows that he's been tanking with pocket jacks, tanks for another 30 seconds, and then makes the right laydown. We're finally out of the red, up $108 3 hours and 40 minutes into the session. I play for another 15 minutes and win another $50 before cashing out. In for $2,300 and out for $2,458 for a profit of $158 after 3 hours and 50 minutes of playtime, which feels like a much bigger win than it actually was, since I was down almost $800 at the worst of it. This was not nearly as big of a win as my usual winning sessions, but I kept the time frame within my usual 4-hour limit, which allowed me to play my best, keeping all decisions mathematical and logical. This brings us to our next session, which takes place the very next night at 2:51 in the morning on June 24th. As usual, we're playing 2-5 no limit hold'em at the Wynn Encore in Las Vegas, where I bind for $1,500, which is 300 big blinds. The very first hand we're dealt, there's a live 10. I open to 25 in the cutoff with 4-5 of hearts. The button, big blind, and straddle all call, so we go four-handed in position to a flop of ace, king, 3, with 2 diamonds and 1 spade. When everyone checks it over to us, I lead with a hefty c-bet of 75, with nothing but a naked gut shot, since I'm a huge fan of full frontal nudity. I may only have 5 high right this second, but I have 2 very powerful components working for me right now. One is position, and the other is range advantage. This flop completely smashes my range as the original raiser. Everyone folds, so I'm happy to show what I made my last bet with for some early advertising. For this next hand, I open to 20 under the gun with ace-king offsuit. 6 people end up calling, including both the blinds. We go 7-handed to a flop of 5, jack, queen with 2 spades and 1 heart. We flop a gut shot to the nuts and a backdoor nut flush draw. Both blinds check. I'm not about to bluff into 6 other players, so I also check. +1 leads with a half pot bet of 75. The hijack and button both call, but everyone else folds to me. I'm actually getting a pretty decent price to try to spike a naked 10, assuming it's not a spade, or even if it is a spade, the river might bring in another spade, so I make the call. I'm not sure if I have any clean overcards here though, because someone could easily be carrying a hand like jack queen, queen king, or ace queen, so if I spike one of my overcards, I'm just going to check. The turn is a king of spades, completing the front door flush. Well, we did spike one of our overcards after all, but it's not exactly what we were looking for. One pair is not really what I'm looking for in this type of board, so I start with a check, but thankfully everyone checks around. The river is a 9 of clubs, so any naked 10 makes a straight. I consider going for a huge bluff here since I'm blocking the nuts with my ace of spades, but our hand might actually be best, so there's no point. We have decent showdown value. We would also have to get the bluff through 3 other players, so that prospect doesn't exactly excite me. I wouldn't be surprised if someone were holding a baby flush here and is just checking for pot control. I check again, and the action gets checked around once more. +1, who led the round of betting on the flop, shows a set of 5s, and the button shows king-queen, so I was right that our overcards were not indeed live. If we had spiked a 10, however, we might have been able to get that +1 player's entire stack with his bottom set. My hand would be pretty disguised with my small open amount of only 20. Oh well, at least we didn't lose very much that hand by being overly aggressive. For this next hand, there's a live 10. I open to 35 in the hijack with king-jack of spades. The cutoff, small blind, and straddle all call, so we go 4 ways to a flop of queen, 8, 2, rainbow with 1 spade. We flop 1 overcard with a couple of different backdoor draws. Everyone checks to the cutoff, who leads with a third pot bet of 50. The small blind folds, but the straddle calls. This is going to be a very loose call for me, but 50 is pretty much the max I'm willing to pay. That's a cheap price for the outs I have, which I'm going to assume is 3 clean outs for the king and 2 more for the 2 different backdoor draws I have. The turn is an 8 of spades. This negates my 3 outs for a king on the river if someone stuck around the flop with second pair, but it increases my outs all the way up to 12 if I'm only up against a naked queen. The straddle suddenly comes out of the woodworks and leads with a bet of 115. I consider folding here. I'm drawing dead against a slow-played set of 2s. The price is just really, really good if I'm only against a naked queen, so I eventually decide to make the call. The cutoff folds for this incredibly cheap price, so all he did was bloat up the pot for no reason. The river breaks out with the 10 of clubs. The straddle checks. He either has an 8 here or a queen. The downside of showing that 5-high bluff my very first hand is that my table image is probably pretty bad right now. It's a double-edged sword. I'm more likely to get called off when I make a monster, but also likely to get called if I make a bluff attempt. Always be aware of your table image. There's no way I'm getting an 8 or a queen to fold the way this hand played out, so I check the action back. Yes, I only have king high, but a lot of amateurs make the mistake of betting here just because the action gets checked to them. Think about the story you're trying to sell. If it doesn't make sense, just give up. It'll be cheaper for you in the long run. The straddle ends up showing a much bigger monster than I had imagined. He tables ace-queen of hearts. Yeah, there's no way I'm getting a bluff past a hand like that, but it's good to know that all of my 12 outs were clean. Mathematically, I made the right call on the turn. Remember this for the future. Just because someone checks to you on the river doesn't mean their hand is weak. Sometimes, it's just to give you rope to try to hang yourself with a very ill-timed bluff. With this loss, we're down $258 only 30 minutes into the session. 5 minutes later, I open to 15 under the gun with pocket sixes. This is a hand you'll want to limp if your table raises and 3-bets a lot, but you're free to open with a small raise if your table is more on the passive side. The low jack and small blind call, but the big blind suddenly raises to 95 with a starting stack of about 600. This is just an easy fold if you're out of position. I'm not getting the right odds to set mine. However, I'm not fully convinced that I'm behind yet. A shorter stack will often try to steal the dead money from out of the blinds, since it's a good percentage of their stack. So I make the call, and everyone else folds. The flop comes jack, 2, 5, rainbow. My opponent c-bets for another stagnant 95. I'm still not fully convinced I'm behind. Hands such as king-queen, ace-queen, or ace-king, which are all very likely 3-bet candidates, will often completely miss this flop. Plus, if I am behind, what my opponent is unaware of is the fact that I've been working out at the gym lately. I'm in extremely good shape for a 45-year-old man. I can do over 30 pull-ups. I have a 4-pack and everything. So I make the call. The turn brings in a 6 of clubs. Woohoo! See what I mean? All that gym time has paid off. I'm really good at hitting sets. I practice 2 to 3 times a week, buddy. So now, instead of bluff catching, I'm really hoping my opponent actually has a great hand. So when he leads for another 250, leaving only 200 behind, I put him all in for the remainder of his stack. He makes the call. The river is a 10 of clubs, which is pretty insubstantial. We're holding pretty close to the nuts. I announce a set, table my hand, and take down our first nice-sized pot. We're finally out of the hole and up $356. So how do you make $10K a month playing 2-5 part-time? It's super easy, actually. You just call badly and get lucky. Vegas, baby! So this next hand takes place a whole 2 hours later. The last 2 hours fly by incredibly slow with a whole lot of diddly squat happening. Not a single hand worth recording. I've lost back $120 on my winnings, which is pretty negligible after playing for over 2 hours. Here, there's a live 10. I open to 25 under the gun with king-9 of diamonds. Only the straddle calls, so we somehow end up heads up in position, which is a great spot to be in. The flop comes 8, 7, 10 with 2 diamonds. Oh my goodness! This flop is like a wet dream for our wider than normal open range. We're open-ended with a king-high flush draw and holding an overcard to a single pair holding. When our opponent checks it over to us, I start with a small, stagnant $25 c-bet. The straddle suddenly check raises to 65. I consider my options. I'm mathematically ahead of any single pair holding. However, I'm mathematically behind anything beyond just a single pair. A check raise usually signifies a hand stronger than just a single pair. My hand is also completely disguised, and I also have position. Regardless of whether I make a straight or a flush, I think it's going to be incredibly sneaky, so I decide to just make the call here. The turn is a beautiful jack of spades. I make the straight with massive outs to improve. We can still hit a diamond or even a queen to further improve our hand. Our opponent leads again with another strong bet of 125. Again, I consider my options. We could raise for value here. We're free rolling against a naked 9. But then again, we still have position, which is a very powerful thing to have. My opponent might have complete air here. He might just be repping a strong hand, since this board would typically be much better for his range if he suspects I just have random overcards or one pair type of holding like ace-10. So I elect to just keep his bluffs in and make the call. The river is a 4 of clubs, so we don't improve. Our opponent shoots out another strong bet of 250, keeping with his story that he has a monster. He only has 550 behind. I played with this hand so incredibly deceptively. We're holding the second nuts, losing only to queen 9, which would be a pretty random hand for my opponent to have here. So I decided to go for value and target hands like 2 pairs or a set that decided to get out of line and shove all in for our opponent's remaining stack. We don't get snap called, which is always a good sign. Heck, even a naked 9 should snap call this river. I mean, he doesn't have a whole lot behind, so I doubt we're chopping. Our opponent postures for about 15 seconds before making the fold. Yeah, that wasn't long enough to tank for any real hand. Pretty sure he had complete air. Good thing I decided to play my hand slower for this instance and get paid the max. With this win, we're up $670 2 hours and 35 minutes into the session. For the last hand of the night, it's been another hour and a half since that King 9 hand. Another snooze fest without anything significant happening. Here, under the gun limps. The middle position raises the action to 20. The button calls. I have a hand that's great to squeeze in position, but in the small blind, I just make the call with Jack Queen of spades. The big blind folds, but the limper calls as well, so we go 4-handed out of position to a flop of 9, 10, Jack, rainbow. We flop top pair with a decent kicker and an open-ended straight draw. Don't get too excited though. This hand is pretty weak for this board texture. Any one of our opponents could have already flopped a straight, or at least 2 pairs. So I start with a check, and the action gets checked around to the button, who leads with a massive pot-sized bet of 75 into the $85 pot. I don't think that's a 1-pair type of holding, but it's too early to fold just yet, so I make the call, but everyone else folds. The turn is a 6 of clubs. We don't improve. So again, I start with a check. My opponent fires again, even bigger this time. He shoots out a slight overbet to 250 into the pot of 235. Ugh, yuck. No, I'm done with this hand. No thanks, buddy. I make an easy fold and head to the cage to cash out. In for 1700 and out for 2206 after 4 hours and 15 minutes of playtime for a profit of $506. My 20th and 21st winning sessions weren't particularly massive, but I think I played really well in both of them, which is all I can expect. I kept my sessions to my 4-hour time limit and crawled out of the hole in both sessions, never letting boredom or tilt get the best of me. You can't expect all of your wins to be massive. You can't even expect to win every time you sit down to do battle at the poker tables. All you can hope for is that you play your best and make all the right decisions. So did I really win 21 sessions in a row? Heck yeah, I did. And have I really been making over $10,000 a month playing 2-5 only part-time? Well, I've been doing so for at least 6 months straight now. Follow along my journey and maybe you can pick up a trick or two and learn to do the same. 10 big blinds an hour? Nah, bro, try over 30. This is admittedly over a pretty short time span of only 6 months. But then again, 420 hours is nothing to sneeze at either. I've only shown the last 6 months of data, which is a very small pip in the grand scheme of things. Want to know if I can keep this insane hourly rate going? Well, then you'll just have to keep watching my videos. I do offer poker coaching for anyone who's interested. My hourly rates are over on my Patreon. As to the cash drawing, for this video, you just need to subscribe to my channel. Like this video. Comment anything your heart desires. It has to be more than just a naked number though. Then, pick a number between 75 and 1,000. Numbers picked outside of this range will be disqualified, as well as any comments that don't actually say anything. Regarding the winner of the last raffle, let's see. It looks like it's gonna be... Congratulations to Winter Time! Make sure to contact me to claim your prize. And as always, I hope to see everyone in the next video.